Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Happy Cynics. Our last episode, we were very apocalyptic, talking about, especially the Christian. We were talking about the Christian apocalypse.
Right.
And, of course, one of the things that we're kind of seeing unfold here is climate change. This has been around now long enough that even a lot of the people that 20 years ago were naysayers, it's kind of hard to deny. So we have Isaac, any other kind of background to you like we should lay out here before
I think
introducing our guest?
One of the questions that we sort of addressed last time was, there's this like mindset that the apocalypse is sort of a good thing in some people's minds.
Well, yeah.
And
Jesus is going to come back. I mean, that's good.
Right, exactly.
Well,
anyway. in certain interpretations, but
depends on
particularly
what side
the millennial
side,
even pre and post both kind of fall into that category. But if you're an amillennialist, or if you take a less literal reading of the text, the apocalypse, the end of the world, the end of history, is a bad thing.
Yes.
So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was that we are facing certain crises right now, today, that are at the level of threatening all humanity.
Yes.
And so we wanted to talk about those in light of our conversation about the apocalypse in the last episode.
Yes. All right. And I got some things I want to kind of ask and say, but without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest today, and it's none other than Emma, Isaac's wife, Emma Dillman. And Emma, thank you for being here. And this happens to be her area of expertise. So, Emma, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background, even say a little bit about what got you interested in environmental science.
Absolutely. It's lovely to be here. I have a bachelor's degree in environmental science and a master's degree in environmental education. I originally decided to go to school for these things because I realized that I was privileged enough to be able to go to a school, and I should be able to use my education to fight for something that requires fighting for. And I figured the Earth did not have a voice, so I could loan it one.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And so I currently work for one of my county governments doing environmental education. Primarily, I work with school-age children. I host field trips at my facility, as well as going around to different elementary schools in my county and hosting programs in their classrooms. I teach on topics such as water pollution, recycling, plastics, composting and food waste, and other things like that.
Wow. All right. That's pretty cool. So let me ask you this. Could you give us maybe a little background on how we got where we're at here?
Yeah. So climate change, in case you are unaware, climate change is basically referring to a long-term shift in temperatures and weather patterns.
Okay.
It is a longer process than just your average daily weather. This is over years and years and years and millennia.
We're talking about, say, the whole atmosphere of the Earth warming by several degrees over, say, many decades, right?
Yes, absolutely. The atmosphere is warming by something that we call greenhouse gases.
Right.
Primarily, those are carbon dioxide and methane. Those gases act almost as an insulating blanket. So when they are released into the atmosphere, they are not dissipated. Instead, they collect together and they wrap encircling the Earth, and they do not let heat out.
Right.
So sunlight is able to pass through them. Heat is able to pass through them. However, heat is not released, which then means we're essentially living inside of an easy bake oven of our own creation. There are some people that have tried to say that climate change is not caused by human activity, but there is no scientific evidence for that, as the rate of greenhouse gases that have been emitted since the industrialization era have increased, more than we could say, more than would happen by a natural process. It actually has led geologists and other people of the area of study to name this epoch or this era as the Anthropocene, which means recent human activity.
Right.
So there's a sort of, you hear a lot when people talk about this, that climate change is like natural, right? That's one of the like quips that people
the
go
Earth
to.
is bound to get colder and warmer, and we had an ice age, and so...
Right, the Earth goes through cycles. But from my understanding, those cycles are sort of driven by the historic levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So can you speak at all to like the history of these elements and their lifetime on Earth?
You are right. A lot of people will combat the idea of climate change by saying we have cooling periods, we have warming periods. Things will heat up, and then don't worry, they'll get colder again. We'll see icebergs and glaciers within our lifetime or, the next.
Uh-huh.
The problem with that assumption is that there is more and more greenhouse gas emissions that are constantly being produced into the atmosphere than what our Earth and our atmosphere can safely recover from. There isn't an ability to bounce back anymore. If you look at a graph, people frequently reference it as a hockey stick curve because you will see that it has been flat with a zoomed out view. You have high points, you have low points, but when you're zoomed out, it is essentially a flat line until about the 1800s when the industrialization started and we were burning a lot more of fossil fuels, coal, things like that the greenhouse gas emissions suddenly started spiking, which then has increased the warming of our Earth.
Okay, so with all this warming, what do we expect?
Oh, the list of the consequences of what climate change can bring are quite long, and this is how we connect back into the apocalypse narrative that you guys have been working on.
Okay.
Some of the things that climate change, as you would expect with a higher rise in temperatures globally, we are going to have an increased amount of heat periods.
Right.
We will have... it is estimated that we will have more days above 90 degrees by a significant amount. We also will have much more intense droughts. We will have longer heat waves,
right,
which will then lead to water scarcity, which will also lead to longer wildfire seasons with more intense fires,
right,
which we saw last summer. There was large amounts of wildfires, enough to make national news. Those are only going to get worse and more intense and harder to battle. It also is going to cause rising sea levels, which some people say, hey, that's great, maybe I'll have beachfront property soon. But what that doesn't take into account is that the people that already live close to the ocean or live on island nations are going to be displaced. So, in addition with the rising sea levels, we are also going to have an increased amount of flooding. We are going to have melting polar ice, which then increases the flooding and the sea levels. We are going to have an increase in catastrophic storms. So hurricanes will be more intense. With all of the changing of temperatures and water levels, there will also be a change of the amount of precipitation. So when you have a warmer atmosphere, it will shift your storm patterns. So we will have longer periods of rain, which causes the flooding.
Right.
But that also means that our storms will be much more intense, leading to more concerning things like tornadoes and other natural disasters.
Right. So less like balanced climate where you just have periods of sunshine and rain to kind of alternate. Yes. More of the Earth is going to have more like tropical type climate, right? With very long drought seasons and like long dry seasons and then long rainy seasons.
Yes.
So we won't get our rainfall just periodically when we need it. It'll all basically come largely a couple times a year. And and then in between, we'll be just kind of hurting for water.
Yes. That also means that our crops and our agriculture will be hurting for water and grow periods. So our food structure and our food chain will be destabilized. It also means that we are not able to rely on typical patterns that we would have, which affects our grow season and our rain season. We will have a change of our seasons. So they are estimating that the warmer seasons will start sooner and they will last longer. The colder seasons will be extended and they will not last as long. We also probably will not have as much snow, which some people will celebrate, I'm sure, but all in the name of balance.
We're already seeing that. I mean, those of us, at least 50, 60 years old, just know that there's not as much snowfall on the average winter anymore as there used to be when we were young.
I remember in my lifetime when I was a kid, once it was like December, there was snow on the ground all the way through.
Yeah, there was
March.
sled riding almost all the time.
Yeah,
it really wasn't until February till it was warm enough to start melting, all of it melting off. Let me return for a second, Emma.
Mm-hmm.
You said something about we're at a point where we can't bounce back. Could you say more about that? Because I think probably in a lot of people's minds, people are thinking, it's just the liberals panicking again. The sky is falling, Chicken Little. It's not that bad. We'll be able to put our minds to it. After all, our technology has done so many other great things. Look at all the other things we can do. We'll fix this. We'll figure out a way to avert the disaster. So how would you respond to that? I guess there is a possibility if we discover some kind of new technology, but let's say barring that we don't have some kind of earth-shattering new science to come in and figure out how to reverse or get rid of, say, greenhouse gases or something like that, then what are we talking about here over next, say, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? So how do you see this unfolding?
So the IPCC is predicting into the next 100 years. Most of their science and their data is for larger projections because that is an easier way to gather data and to be able to interpret it. I do know that the IPCC for the last year was hoping to keep the rise of the temperature of the total global temperature. The average temperature, they wanted to keep it around 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
And as of today, they said, well, that's no longer an option. We're going to try to keep it below 3 or 4 degrees Celsius as far as a rise. So to the people that are saying this is nothing to be concerned about and we don't have to worry about it until later, that luxury is no longer afforded to us.
Now, there are reasons for those specific temperatures being chosen. Now, because to someone who's not as trained in this, 1 or 2 degrees doesn't sound like that much.
Right. But
there are specific reasons that 3 degrees and 4 degrees Celsius changes would be catastrophic.
Exactly. The 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius would be to buy us more time, essentially, that we can figure something out. The 3 to 4 degrees is now going to be about maintaining and trying to quickly, even faster than before, go on a downward spiral of temperature and greenhouse gas emissions. If we get beyond the warming of 4 degrees, it spells a lot of bad for a lot of the different ecosystems and climates around the Earth.
Yeah, there's a point at which this kind of runs away from us, doesn't it?
Yes. There are concerns as of in the 2030s to the 2050s where we will see the direct actions of what's happening right now. We will already begin to see negative unreversible effects by 2030, 2035, which is not that far away.
Oh my. So what are the things that we need to be doing now? Besides just stop burning fossil fuels. Now, what about, maybe I'm getting ahead. So I don't, maybe you want to say something about that. I mean, maybe some of this sounds pretty obvious. Some of this has to do recycling and all that just has to do with landfills, right? That's not, is that really tied into climate change or that's just kind of protecting ecosphere for other reasons?
Well, everything's all connected. So every aspect, it's actually a little bit challenging when you're an environmental scientist of choosing a niche to focus on.
Okay.
Because everything is so interconnected that even if I consider myself a recycling expert,
Okay.
even though I am focusing on recycling, a lot of my job overlaps into ecosystem management and resource management that would otherwise be covered by other branches of environmental science. The concern with recycling and landfills and things like that are the drive in plastic consumption, because plastic is made from oil.
Right.
And in order to create plastic, we need to drill more oil. We also need to burn oil to create plastic. And some plastics are unable to be recycled. So we have gone to all of the effort. We have wasted the oil only for them to be thrown away.
It takes decades, right, for that stuff to decompose, and then it's not really good even after it decomposes.
It's actually longer than decades. We have, for different types of plastic, we have laboratory estimates of how long it might take to break down. But so far, we have not seen plastics break down in our lifetime. I can tell you that the standard estimate for, say, a plastic bag or other types of plastic materials is around 100 to 400 years of breaking down.
Wow.
And that is not breaking down like your backyard compost heap, where you're then able to reuse it and it turns into, dirt or fertilizer. Instead, it is only broken down into tiny nanoparticles, which are called microplastics, which is a whole other ball of wax of concern for human health, environmental health, and, the status of our world.
Plastics are sort of tied into the oil industry.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what I'm trying to get at is, why is it that converting an oil into a plastic is an emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? How do those two things connect? Because I feel like a lot of people understand that there's a problem with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but don't understand the supply chain that leads to that carbon dioxide directly ending into the atmosphere.
Okay, I understand. So all oil, natural gas, and crude oil that we find underground are remnants of fossils and other long-time dead organic matter. When organic matter is no longer alive, it then is increased in its carbon containment. So essentially, all of these pockets of natural gas, crude oil, anything else that is in that kind of family, they are all carbon deposits. So we are not only removing carbon from the earth, we then, in burning it, it is released into the atmosphere, and then it does not go anywhere. It can go some places, and we can get into that later, such as the ocean and trees and things like that. Because there is a whole carbon cycle, just as much as there is a water cycle that we learn about. It rains, it goes to a puddle,
right.
The puddle evaporates, it goes back into a cloud, it rains again. It's a very similar kind of cycle to carbon, which is released from whatever is holding it. It goes into the atmosphere, it comes down as air molecules, or with the rain, it goes into the soil, it then is released again, and it continues. The problem is that we are adding so much additional carbon dioxide that the current cycle is unable to hold it. Henceforth, it stays in the atmosphere as greenhouse gases.
Yeah, you can sort of think of carbon a little bit like iron oxide, like when carbon is decaying off of a life form, because life is made of carbon, basically,
yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So like a tree is made of cellulose, which is just a bunch of long carbon bonds.
Yes.
When that is no longer living, it's exposed to the air and rusts and turns into a vapor, basically. Yes. And so by burning it, you're just accelerating the oxidation of the copper.
Yes.
Or not the copper, the carbon, sorry. You're accelerating the oxidation process. There's a whole interesting chemistry to this that is then returned to a non-atmospheric state in the form of living things.
Yes.
So what have we been doing? What do we need to be doing?
We have been burning and releasing carbon without any form of we have rules and regulations, but we have been burning it without abandon. And what we would need to be doing, this question is a little bit tricky. If I was talking to an individual, I would say, in order to stave off depression and the end is coming, why bother caring anymore? In order to stave that kind of emotion off, I would say it is your duty to recycle and to do the best that you can.
Mm-hmm.
However, unless everyone banded together and we did kind of a ripple effect grassroots movement, individuals by themselves do not have much to gain as far as creating solutions, as large companies, large nations as a whole, things like that are bigger producers, bigger emitters. I hesitate to tell people that because I try really hard to give people something to focus on, to give them hope. That's kind of my whole part of my job that I work with. But it is difficult to enact a positive change on your own. However, if you continue to not care, you are snowballing the negative effect.
Right. Accelerating it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as far as what we should do, I mean, I would recommend if you are able to look into where you are emitting your carbon, try to reduce with a fuel efficient car, or even if you're able to do something that's not car dependent. Did you want to know a fun fact?
Yes. Always.
Have you ever heard of the term your carbon footprint?
Yes.
So your carbon footprint, for anyone that doesn't know, is frequently used as a way of tracking how much carbon you as an individual produce.
Okay.
The fun fact of that is it was made extremely popular by a very large oil company called BP as a way of diverting attention and responsibility away from themselves to the common citizen.
Mm-hmm.
As a way of saying, look at how much carbon you are producing.
Mm-hmm.
You should really change your behavior. Shame on you.
Or we care about this. That's why we're trying to help you learn how to do it.
Exactly. However, if we look in the history, BP, along with other oil companies, have not necessarily been the environment's first cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about your own individual carbon emissions are always very good, but being aware that we are small fish in a very large pond.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're kind of brushing up on the question of who is responsible for all of this carbon getting into the atmosphere? Who is the guilty party in this sort of tragedy? And I kind of know that individuals are really not, the normal person out there is not the leading cause of climate change. That large corporations are well over the majority shareholders in the world's carbon emissions.
Yeah.
But could you sort of dive into that a little bit?
So, the Paris Agreement is one of the international agreements to decrease or to address climate change problems and to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. Of the participants in the Paris Agreement, for a while, we were removed out of it as the United States by the Trump administration. I'm happy to announce that we are back in the Paris Agreement as far as keeping us accountable for our greenhouse gas emissions and our climate change effects that we're trying to do. Biden, in his first day of office, re-entered back into the Paris Agreement, which is a very big thing. However, the 7 biggest carbon dioxide and methane, so greenhouse gas emitters, are sometimes noticeably absent from the conversation of what do we do about climate change.
Oh, yeah.
There are oftentimes a lot of blame games played that maybe smaller countries should just try harder instead of keeping accountability with the 7 largest countries that do their own emissions. The 7 largest countries are China, the United States, India, the European Union, Indonesia, the Russian Federation, and Brazil. The 7 of them account for about half of all greenhouse gas emissions in 2020.
Yeah. So Man, there's so much, even just right here, just even maybe this is a place we put a hook out, and hook into this, and maybe continue this part of the conversation in another episode, Isaac. But it just makes me wonder philosophically if people actually care more about money, like if they're that short-sighted, they just care more about enjoying today, regardless of what life may be like for what humans are left in the next century.
Yeah, I wonder, historically, capitalism has been willing to sacrifice lives for profit. That is a tale as old as time.
Yeah, but
as far as the system goes.
You know what? Capitalism, I think, is more efficient at doing this, but I think that all human beings tend to go this way. I think people tend to be selfish. It's really, and I mean, again, it's just not coincidental that the ones who make the most money are the ones who are the last ones to the table who want to make any sacrifices. It just makes me wonder if these people if people are really that selfish that they don't care about their great-grandchildren, or if they're just that stupid that they think that somehow what they're doing isn't going to severely hamper their quality of life in the future.
Well, I don't know if it's really either of those two things. I think it's more, the mindset is more about like, well, if I don't do this, then my very way of life ceases to be. So it's like, if I don't do this, somebody else will. Somebody will come and take my place on this, in this position of power. And somebody else will do this. So I might as well take the cookies for myself and, benefit from this rather than just lose the game altogether.
I frequently have been told, as a younger environmentalist, I have been told by people that are older than me that I don't really care. I'm not going to be around to see the end of the world, so...
Oh my golly.
Sucks to be you. Which is very unfortunate, because then it's like screaming at a brick wall.
How irresponsible.
It's extremely irresponsible, but it is also... this is a really, really big topic.
Yeah.
And I would say that a lot of people don't have the capacity to tackle this. Whether, for whatever reason, we have enough troubles today without borrowing them of tomorrow, even though that's literally what's happening. And so it needs to be more in the people that are in power to address this for the people that are not in the position of power and can afford to spend time and energy and money on this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder if this, just kind of like any other historical atrocity, is really the actions of the few powerful.
Oh,
that certain numbers of, the underclass just go along with long enough for them to get away with it.
Well, okay. So truthfully, you see the same dysfunction internationally as you see even in this country. And I venture to say most of the industrialized countries in the world. We have two parties that just care about themselves. They really don't. They no longer care about doing what's best for the public itself or the country itself. It's all about their power. They would sell out their own people and even their own form of government just to line their pockets and solidify their power. And most people then just sit by and, it's almost like Marx is right. There's only going to be real change if there's a complete revolution. But I think he thought it was just, the wealthy, but it's also the powerful people too. And it's the same thing. You would think that world leaders around the world would all get together and say, okay, let's do this. Let's do it fairly. We're all going to make the same kind of changes, so none of us will be at a disadvantage to one another. It's like everybody stands back and says, well, I'm not doing it until he does it, and I'm not doing it until she does it. And
you're more right than you know. I mean, that is a lot of the complaints and the problems that happen with the Paris Agreement. It also is when there is a change of administration, such as we saw between the Obama and the Trump administration, and you have a person in power that says, I don't want to do this for whatever reason, and then they're able to just withdraw. And so they're saying, I'm breaking an international treaty to further my own gain of whatever it is that I want.
Mm-hmm.
And the 7 main countries that I talked about earlier have a tendency to stall meetings of the Paris Agreement or other climate change initiatives by saying, I won't until they do, and then they say, well, I won't until they do. And no one wants to make the first move. Meanwhile, all the rest of the smaller countries are, wanting to beat their heads against the desk because, not much is happening and the conversation is being taken up by people that don't necessarily care.
So we've talked a lot about the Paris Climate Accords. Can you define them? I'm not like super familiar with what they are.
Yes. So the Paris Climate Accords are a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted by 196 parties at the United Nations Climate Conference in 2021, which you would see referred to as COP21, in Paris in 2015. And then it entered into force, as in the treaty was able to enforce things, a following year in 2016.
So when you say it's like legally binding and it's able to be enforced, what does that mean? What are these agreements to?
The agreements are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It varies depending on what each country is signing that it will do. The Paris agreements try to say, here is our goal for everyone. And then each country is able to say, this is what I promise to do. And then they are therefore legally bound, to what they have said that they will do, which also poses some problems because sometimes countries will promise, well, I'll change by 1%. And then the accords are, that's fine, but we were hoping for more of a commitment. As far as who does the enforcing, it is various groups of the United Nations, which sometimes has traction, sometimes does not. Some of the main seats of the United Nations are held by some of the countries that I mentioned before, of the 7 largest emitters.
Right.
So if you have the people that are causing problems part of the enforcement task force, then it's hard to continue momentum.
Yeah, what is it? The central group, the Security Council or something like that on the United Nations. Yeah, and I'm trying to think how many of those are in that top 7 group, and I don't know if all of them are, but just about all of them are.
Well, the 2 permanent seats are the U.S. and Russia, and those are on the list.
Yeah.
One thing that's kind of interesting, you were talking about political parties and their desire to, line their own pockets or things like that.
Right.
The World Resources Institute created a study, and they found that I lost it in my notes. I want to make sure I get my numbers correctly. So just under half of all Republicans and Republican-leaning independents in the United States expect to make absolutely no sacrifices in their everyday lives because of climate change. In comparison, 88% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents expect to at least have to make minor changes. So you can extrapolate from that data what you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's not surprising. Oh my golly.
Yeah, I wonder what that says about the Republican Party, because this is not about like Congress members. This is about Republican voters.
Well, yeah.
Now I wonder if that mindset is, why should I have to change my lifestyle when I am not part of the oil lobby? I'm not part of these mega corporations who are responsible for like 70% of carbon emissions in the world. Why should I have to make sacrifices when they're not doing anything? Or if that is from the mindset of, I don't care, this isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just going to buy a big truck and roll coal all over town to own the libs.
Yeah, there is a certain, boy, how do I say this?
Kind of the question is, how much is the Republican response to this just antisocial behavior?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's kind of where, like in American politics, let's just say this. I think in the world in general, because of our increased technology and then the effects of our technology, both good and bad. So we were talking about this, like the responsible use of AI. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But then you talk about being able to produce all kinds of manufactured goods, services, and, machinery. Well, then how do you do this responsibly without really disrupting and destroying the ecosphere? And we're at a point, because these effects are getting so great. Let's put it this way. I think it's always been the case in human history that you have some people who, for lack of a better term, they grow up and act like adults and take responsibility for the problems that they cause and try to do something about it. And you have others who just perpetually live in an adolescent state and basically try to delude themselves into some kind of simplified worldview that the bad things aren't really going to happen, or something miraculous is going to happen and keep it from getting worse. They don't want to really have to step up to the plate and deal with the problems that are there. Now, I think that's always been the case with human nature. And so you end up having Nazi regimes. You have people like Attila the Hun. You have all these, you have the followers of Charles Manson, for Pete's sake. But it's like, we're at a point in time now that the technology and the effects are so much greater that now it's becoming, this is no longer something we can just kind of overlook because our neighbor happens to be a little bit irresponsible and childish about different like social issues or whatever. Okay. It was bad enough, like in the United States, we're talking about civil rights and everybody having the right to vote and things like that. But now we're at a point where, we're screwing up really important things. And yet you have a major segment of populations around the world that they just want to stick their heads in the sand and pretend that it doesn't exist, or that it's just going to kind of go away on its own.
It's very interesting. In a lot of my classes, especially in my environmental education classes, there is a question posed of, do you try to focus your efforts on someone that is staunchly disbelieving in climate change or other environmental problems? Or do you spend your time on someone that's kind of in the middle and says, well, maybe I kind of believe it, but I'm not really sure? And the answer almost 100% of the time is that your efforts and your time are more valued with someone that is in the middle than trying to convince someone that is digging their head in the sand. You will, the likelihood that you will change someone's mind if they are in the camp of the sand diggers, then is so much lower than it is for someone that is already open to the idea of changing their mind. Which is hard, because then you feel like you're not really reaching the area of the population that needs to hear about what we teach about. But the reality is that I don't have enough time in the day to teach everyone everything that there is to know about recycling or taking care of the earth. And so my time and my efforts are better spent with people that would be receptive to what I have to say, even if at the end of the day, they don't choose to agree with me.
That raises another question, though, of what is the point of trying to convince individuals of the severity of this problem when individuals really aren't the responsible party? And I think this is sort of a failure on the environmentalist side of this issue, that they have focused, at the behest of the oil companies, on individual action. It seems to me like we need collective action. We need like a labor movement of climate change.
Well, yeah. we need a social movement of business control. It is what really needs to happen. I don't think it necessarily means that we need state ownership of everything, but it's got to come back to the point where, and this is only going to happen if average citizens step up and pay and have to start paying attention to what's going on. Okay. And unfortunately, most of the time it has to get worse before it starts getting better.
Oftentimes you have to address, when I'm teaching, either with children or adults, we have to address the best way to get through to someone is to put it in terms of what's in it for me.
Yeah.
Either it's going to save you money to follow these types of procedures of like recycling and composting and things like that. Or you're not likely to go into a drought. I mean, you are more likely to sustain life, though that is harder to convince people. The negative is harder to convince people than the positive. But in every lesson that I have, including even down to the smallest child, I usually include something in my lessons that is what's in it for me, as a way of addressing, here is a reason that you can be selfish and still achieve the result that I would like you to achieve, while not necessarily caring about the middle ground. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Go ahead.
I think there's a sort of attitude that's prevalent, at least in our generation, of like, this is inevitable. This is already over. That the climate's already dead. We don't. It might not be, gone yet, but it's in its death throes. We're going to be the last generation that knows the Earth in a healthy climate. And it's kind of the smoke 'em if you got 'em mindset. People are just like, I'm not going to have kids because the Earth's going to die. I'm not going to bother with, long-term planning because the Earth's going to die. That is sort of just like a specter haunting people our age.
Okay,
yeah, and so the ability to distance yourself from what's going on is an escape mechanism to almost be able to protect yourself. I know that I don't typically go into the gloom and doom of environmental education, because if I did, I don't know if I'd have the energy to get out of bed every day. And so I think a lot of people, when facing something this big and this problematic and the world is gonna die, if you're facing that kind of a feeling, it's almost like self-preservation to not consider it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering, as all this progresses, it would seem to me that the places on Earth that have the harshest climates now, which are near the equator, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, the kinds of things you were talking about, I think those were typically things that you would only find around the equator. So,
yes,
like deserts and, places with long periods of drought and then big heavy monsoon seasons with like these really powerful, deadly storms that come in. Now, what I could see happening, even maybe within my lifetime and your lifetime, is a lot of places near the equator are now uninhabitable. People are going to have to leave there, and then north and south of the equator, you expand that out, and those areas are going to become more like what the equator weather was, say, 50 years ago.
And while that might sound appealing to someone that wants to go on, vacation to the tropics, we live in the Midwest where we are recording right now, and the Midwest is known for its agricultural production.
Right.
I mean, if we start becoming the tropics, it's not going to be beaches in Bahamas. It's going to be flooding, lack of bread in the stores because there is no wheat. Right. There will be a severe food shortage. And
yes.
Well, and it's interesting if you know, like, the geological history of this area. This used to be the tropics at one point. Even at its current latitude, Illinois used to be a tropical rainforest, and then it was underwater for a long time, and then it became the Midwest. So we are at the carbon levels to return this area to the tropics right now. It will be more than the tropics if we keep going down this road. We have had the amount of carbon in the atmosphere that we have now in ancient, like, pre-human history. But the globe, there was literally no ice on the globe. And part of the issue with what's going on now is that the carbon has increased at an extremely rapid rate. And so the ecosystems don't have the time to adapt to the new environment. So it's not like we're going to become the tropics. Everything's just going to die. There will be no plant life.
I wasn't doing an advertisement for Coppertone or something like that.
Yeah.
But no, and another thing I don't think people really stop to think about, okay, because, our son Seth, he lives in Chicago. When those Canadian wildfires were going on last year, they had to wear masks, I don't know how long, because the air wasn't breathable. And that's what's going to happen in more and more places around the world. There are going to be fewer places with fresh air available for people to breathe. And we're just going to have more and more people crammed into smaller areas. And like you're saying, agriculturally, we're not going to have a temperate climate to be able to grow the food, the food that we need, produce the food that we need for the number of people that we have. We're going to end up with, like, mass. I mean, who knows?
It's going to be like Spaceballs with people breathing canned air.
No,
we have arrived at the apocalypse.
I've never seen that one, but
so the plot of Spaceballs is that there's a planet that ran out of air.
Oh.
And they are stealing air from different planets.
Oh, okay.
And at one point, the president of Planet Spaceball opens up a can of Perrier.
Oh, brother.
And huffs the whole thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Oh, my. Well, I would say this. Okay, so, and kind of wrapping up what we were talking about here, what do you think about this, Emma? I've said before, I'm not in favor of, like, okay, we got to start an armed revolution, take over the companies and make them all, I think there's two ways of power that the average person has. I know there's the power of voting, but even more than that, the way people spend their money. What fuels all of this is money. And if people paid more attention to how they're spending their money and start spending money on things like supporting businesses that are responsible, supporting people that are at least trying to do something positive, and quit. I mean, how often do Americans, even like we've talked about this too, like even with like labor unions and things like that, people would rather pay $5 less for their sneakers and just close their eyes to the fact it's being made in a sweatshop by, an 8-year-old. And they're putting their fellow American out of work because they don't want to spend a little more for their tennis shoes. And it's just the same kind of thing like we had with, say, like free range chickens. You guys have those.
We do. We actually just got 4 more.
Oh, you got the extra. You got the other chickens then, huh?
Yeah. We have a bunch of baby chicks living in our house right now.
So,
much to the cat's delight.
Do you remember the old logic problem? If a chicken and a half lays an egg and a half in a day and a half, how many eggs can a half a dozen chickens lay in a half a dozen days?
Whew. I don't remember that, but it is quite the tongue twister, if nothing else.
We'll work through that on the next episode.
Yeah, it'll be riveting podcasting.
Mind benders. Well, anyway.
Well, so it's interesting you bring up like the sort of vote with your dollar stuff.
Yeah.
We were talking about this earlier today, and I just got finished reading A People's History of the United States, which covers the labor movement pretty extensively.
Mm-hmm.
And almost everything the labor movement ever won for the American people was done through general strikes.
Mm.
And I wonder, like, at what point are people just going to be like, we're just not going to work anymore until this is addressed?
Mm. Wow.
So, a little bit of an interesting thing. You talked a little bit about voting. We do have an election coming up here in the United States.
Yes.
Do
we?
I mean, I know. That's one that I try not to think about.
That's the other spectrum.
No, we have to think about it. Go ahead.
So I have some interesting information because in my research of this, I found out that Biden actually has a lot more environmental policies than most of the common people know.
Okay.
It is actually one of the foremost runnings of his platform.
Oh.
But it is overshadowed by a lot of other things that people care more about.
Everybody just wants to talk about sexuality and inflation.
Mm-hmm.
But I have here that it seems like the people are a little bit divided as far as whether or not his policies are effective. 49% say that they are. 47% say that they are not, which is not necessarily
and these
large
are specifically climate policies.
Correct. These are, specifically about climate policies. Are they moving the U.S. in the correct direction in regards to climate change? So that is not statistically different enough. It is still about half for each. I do, however, have a scale that determines the 10 most important things when determining a climate action forward policy. And of these 10 items, there are 5 of them that are either achieved or significant progress. There are an additional 4 that some progress is being worked on by the Biden administration, and there is only 1 on the list of the top 10 things that is considered off track or not being worked on right now.
Oh, okay.
Could you go through that list?
Yes. So the 3 that are achieved, that have already been done, as of, I believe this is 2022, is set target to cut emissions by at least 50% by 2030. So that's a very good thing for environmental stuff.
Right.
Pass a major climate smart stimulus package after COVID-19, which was done. Tackle super pollutants, which would be large companies, oil refineries,
right?
The large ones producing in the United States. The next 2 are labeled as significant progress. They are require all new passenger vehicles to produce 0 emissions by 2035.
Okay.
And to scale up carbon removal, which we can talk about carbon removal in a little bit if you're interested.
Yes.
The next 4 that are in some progress as of right now, or as of 2022, are to ramp up clean electricity standards, set appliance and equipment standards to replace fossil fuels with electricity whenever feasible, set emissions performance standards for cement, steel, and plastics, and reestablish international leadership in the climate change area. The only one that is off track or not being worked on right now by the Biden administration is to tax pollution.
Oh.
So that could be a very big part of something to address. Is if we are putting a tax on your pollution that you create. I mean, people are motivated by money, whether you're a big corporation or an individual. And so if we, punish your pollution with a tax, that might motivate companies and individuals to make a change.
Yeah, I think that would be a strong policy choice.
It's probably why it's not current right now.
Well, I think it would be very good to do, but the question is, so many corporations get out of taxes as the tax code is written right now.
That's very true.
Yeah.
You'd have to write this very carefully, and tax codes are going to have bipartisan hands on them, which means there's going to be some loophole left.
There is a system that tax pollutants, essentially, as a form of a market. The United States does not currently have a market for this. California does, which is really interesting, but a lot of other international companies do. It is carbon credits or carbon offsets. You might see either one of those. It is a market that allows investors and corporations to trade both carbon credits and offsets simultaneously. It mitigates the environmental crisis while also creating new market opportunities. While I was first researching this, it sounds a little bit suspicious. Essentially how it works is if you have a governing body that's overseeing this market, which the United States does not currently, but we'll use California as an example. Mm-hmm. If California says, Company A, you are only allowed to produce 400 tons of carbon dioxide this year. If I, as Company A, produce 500, I now have to pay for that extra 100 that I did. And that is where the carbon credits come in. It's like an allowance. It's a permission slip that you are allowed to produce X amount and no more. Otherwise, we are going to charge you and tax you extensively. And there's also extensive fees to go along with it. Now, there are also carbon offsets, which, let's say Company B is also given that 400 limit. Mm-hmm. If Company B is only producing 200, they then could sell their extra 200 credits that they did not use to Company A to then simultaneously profit their company and also to offset Company A's pollution.
Okay.
To save them from fees and taxes and things like that. It's hard to say if this is a perfect system. It feels a little bit like there's a lot of room for error. There's a lot of room for abuse, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But depending on the fees and the taxes that are arranged afterwards, this could be something that could be used. It is in effect by some of the countries that are in the Paris agreements. And the Paris Agreement does recommend this type of thing.
Oh.
This does kind of feel like the sort of thing that would have helped in like the 80s.
Yes.
Before we were up creek.
Yes, that's very true. But it is a newer way of trying to capitalize on carbon emissions. So you as an individual, you could choose to fly with an airline that offers carbon offsets. You could choose to buy them yourself. And some people are interested in almost as a subsidiary to the stock exchange, entering into a buying and selling of carbon credits. That feels a little bit slippery to me because then we are taking the significance of carbon away from its source, and now it is instead a digital number that...
Well, also, at what point are you... Because this market can't exist if there are zero emissions. At what point are you perpetuating emissions?
That's my other concern, but
if people are profiting off of emissions, they're going to do it.
That's the other thing, is if you're profiting, if Company A is overproducing and then they've got a buddy in Company B, then, you can kind of work together to simultaneously make money for everyone. Mm-hmm. I'm not an economist, so I can't necessarily speak to this, but it is a system that is being proposed as a way of addressing, through the market, of addressing climate change and things like that.
Well,
the market is famously efficient at dealing with societal issues.
Yeah. Like
again, I maybe this would work, maybe it wouldn't. I probably a strike would be faster, but if the people that are striking are ones that are able to do it, you're not going to be looking at people that don't have power, that need to go to work to be able to have their income, to be able to afford the luxury of going on strike.
Well, that's where, like, this has to be a grassroots movement before action can take place. And climate strikes have happened. That's how Greta Thunberg got famous, is a student strike on behalf of, climate change.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, historically, a strike would take place. A union would make sure that strikers had food and the basic necessities, even to the point of, like, back in, like, the coal mining, like, when that ran entire states. If you weren't working at the coal mine, you'd become homeless instantly because the coal mine owned your house. So unions, even then, used to set up, like, whole tent cities for strikers. That is the sort of organization we would need in order for such an action to take place.
I have another note here about the carbon offsets, because you'll hear a lot about carbon neutrality, like that's something that we're trying to reach. However, carbon neutrality does not achieve any sort of systematic change. It is a feel-good Band-Aid that is put on the problem. The quote that I have here is, a coal-powered business could be entirely carbon neutral as long as it stops some landfill gas in Malaysia from entering the atmosphere equal to the emissions it's still releasing. So there's no accountability. It's just a nice label that makes your consumers feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you could sort of give a little explanation about greenwashing.
Greenwashing is a frustrating topic. It is the labeling of something as green or eco-friendly or environmentally friendly or organic sometimes even gets thrown in as one of these type of things, where it is a label that is put on a product to influence you to buy it, but it does not actually mean the thing that you are buying is what it is saying it is.
Okay.
So a prime example, you might buy a packet of socks, and the little tag that's on the socks, it says 100% recycled, which leads you to believe that the socks that I'm buying are from recycled textiles, and I'm a conscientious buyer. Whereas instead, it might be that the little tag that's on the socks is 100% recycled, and the socks are made from polyester that, comes from wherever, that has nothing to do with recycling. So it is, there are laws about it, but they're very, very vague. And I don't necessarily know if they address a lot of the greenwashing properties that happen. So, like, next time you go to the grocery store, you'll walk down any aisle, and it will say, this is a green product, or an eco-friendly product, or all sorts of different types of labels to get you to...
Yeah, like the free-range chickens.
Good.
That's what I was bringing up.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
In other words, we give them an extra 3 inches.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Actually, I mean, to the point, free-range, if you're buying free-range eggs, are probably the more cared-for chickens. You cannot put free range on. They have to have, I believe it's an 8 feet of outdoor space, like access to 8 feet of outdoor space, which is not a lot. But then if you say cage free chickens are able to stick their head out of a fence. So it varies based on the label, but again, it's getting you to vote with your, your heart and your emotions.
Right.
Not vote, buy.
Yeah, and both of those labels, as opposed to pasture-raised chickens, which are actually what you think of as free range.
Right.
Okay.
Which is they are not caged. And they are in a field.
They are in a field, and they come home at night, and then they go back out in the field in the morning.
Which is what we have. We have pasture chickens.
And it's just amazing. See, like the lengths that people will go to avoid having to be responsible because it'll cost a little more money or something like that.
Yep. I mean, I would recommend if you're concerned about your egg buying consumption, but you cannot afford pasture-raised eggs, probably the better thing that you could do is just not buy your eggs in a styrofoam container. Because styrofoam is a type of plastic that cannot be broken down. It cannot be used again. It is actually extremely carcinogenic if you are to break it down or try to use it for different things. And so if you buy something in a cardboard container, that breaks down very easily and does not produce any sort of health problems. So if you're concerned, I would go for the non-plastic option.
That sounds good. Yes, that makes sense.
In terms of a protein source, eggs are actually an environmentally friendly choice.
They are.
More environmentally friendly than, like, beef.
Yeah. Yeah, chickens aren't farting methane into the atmosphere.
I have cow farts methane in my notes.
Yeah, I figured you would, because the beef industry contributes a lot to greenhouse gases because of methane, right? Flatulence.
Yes. A lot of people like to say it is a common, not quite a conspiracy theory, but it's a commonly stated fact that is used to destabilize talks about greenhouse gas emissions, is that it's really all the dairy farmers and the cattle farmers. It's their fault because they're not collecting cow farts and using them as fuel for later on. We actually did try this in 2014. There were farms that were trying to, their cows were wearing backpacks, and whenever the cows farted, it collected in the backpack, and then they burned it as a way of producing energy for something. But while cows do pass gas quite frequently, the greater concern is that their manure is very rich in methane. Mm-hmm. And so that manure is oftentimes not taken care of or disposed of properly, which then is releasing it into the atmosphere. I think that I would personally say that the industrialization of large companies is probably a greater producer than dairy farmers, mm-hmm. though that is a big thing. Cattle it's actually more of a their impact is more in the water supply type of thing. It takes about 1,800 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef.
Wow.
So that poses its own problems. And don't get me wrong, I mean, cow farts are a big problem, but they're not a large enough thing that they're in competition with the industrialization of, larger greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I don't have a citable source for this, but I watched a documentary years ago about how if you return to farming cows the way our ancestors farmed cows on open pastures,
right,
where you are rotating the cows between different pastures,
right,
it actually sequesters more carbon than the methane. Like it sort of offsets itself in terms of the grass. The grasses and the
cover crops.
Yeah, the manure allows the grass to grow, and that sequesters carbon, but only if that grass is like old school prairie grass, not like your front lawn grass, because those roots go like feet into the earth rather than inches.
Oh, okay.
So if you're going to consume beef, which we do,
mm-hmm.
It's if you want to be environmentally friendly, which is you don't always have to be because our impact is tiny, but you can buy local beef.
Yes. Yeah, that's what we did. We know somebody that raises the beef themselves, and then so get it butchered locally, killed humanely.
Go in with your friends on half a cow.
Yes. Yeah, even a quarter is good amount of meat. I couldn't help it. My twisted sense of humor. You were talking about them catching cow farts.
Uh-huh.
Did you ever see the old Droopy cartoons where like the guys are screaming into a bottle and then they run out and they open it up and then it screams? Yes. I was wondering, like, they take the lid off and it's
That would be a wonderful practical joke. I'm sure it would smell horrible.
Have you ever seen those videos of the cows who get so bloated with methane that they actually, this might be really gross for some listeners, but they actually like poke a hole in the cow's stomach and insert a metal tube, and you can light the methane coming out of the cow's stomach.
Oh my!
Coming out of this tube, like those, like you see them at like
landfills,
like the little burn tube for the methane releases.
Oh my golly!
So landfills oftentimes have to release methane because it is produced in landfills. It is produced by organic materials such as your yard waste or your food waste. It does not break down in a landfill because a landfill is an anaerobic environment, meaning without oxygen.
Right.
And so when that type of stuff breaks down, it forms methane, and there has to be a way to release it. Otherwise, we might have an explosion. But oftentimes people think, well, they just burn the methane, so everything is fine. This is not true. It is a large greenhouse gas emissions, and it's just not very well regulated. it is regulated, and they do have to test for it, and they have a lot of, like the landfill operations have a lot of responsibilities with that, but it is a greenhouse gas that is frequently slid under the rug.
Now, as far as I understand, methane breaks down within like a few years after it's emitted into the atmosphere. That's the difference. Like carbon lasts forever. Methane breaks down fairly quickly, and the point of burning it is to basically pre-break it down.
Yes.
Into other greenhouse gases.
Yes, this is true. But methane is much more, methane is significantly more potent of a greenhouse gas than CO2. Right. So you might have a little bit of methane and it will do the same amount of damage as a lot of CO2. So, I mean, if you wanted something to take home and do about that, composting is a great option of being able to break down your food scraps naturally without releasing methane because it is exposed to air. So then it is releasing other gases that are not carbon dioxide, not methane, and you're concentrating the nutrients, and so you're able to use it for your plants and gardens and things like that.
It does release some greenhouse gases to compost, doesn't it?
Not that I'm aware of. I'll have to look into that.
I had always assumed that there's like a little bit of carbon dioxide released from the breakdown of the plant matter.
I don't think so, because you have a balance of things that are higher in nitrogen, which are your organic material, and then you have things that are high in carbon, like paper or wood scraps or things like that.
Before we wrap up, would you say about what carbon removal is?
Oh, yeah. So there are some natural ways that we are addressing the carbon dioxide problem in the atmosphere,
right?
Which is called carbon sequestering.
Okay.
So keeping carbon essentially out of the atmosphere or pulling it out.
Right.
One of the most common things that people would know if they took any form of chemistry, one of the first chemical equations you learn is the photosynthesis equation, of which case trees take carbon dioxide and they produce it into sugar. Which is what they use as their nutrients. That sugar is translated to cellulose, which is the type of cells that they have that form the long chains.
Right. It's the chemical compound that makes up their cells.
Yes. So trees are actually, if it is a fully mature tree, it is able to sequester 48 pounds of carbon dioxide a year.
Oh.
And then as that tree grows, and it covers more surface area and there are more spaces in it, it is able to sequester more. So a lot of people are saying in order to combat climate change and greenhouse gases, we need to plant more trees. That is a totally valid, 100% not going to harm the earth in doing that. Another option of what people are doing is with the ocean. The ocean is already a carbon dioxide sink, so it will accumulate in the algae and the phytoplankton.
Right.
And so they are...
It's also dissolved into the ocean itself, the water itself.
Yes.
It's like a big soda.
Exactly. Only not necessarily tasting great. So they are able to... their ocean habitats, such as seagrasses and mangroves, along with their food webs and food chains that are around them, are able to sequester 4 times as amount of carbon dioxide as a terrestrial forest. So that would be, somewhere around 150 pounds of carbon dioxide, at least compared to a tree.
Right.
However, the ocean is not the perfect answer.
Right.
Because it's already absorbed about 30% of carbon dioxide and 90% of all excess heat created by humans, since time. But this means that it causes the ocean to warm, which also increases the acidification.
Yes.
Which decreases the life availability of the ocean.
Yes.
However, right now, the ocean currently holds 42 times more carbon than the atmosphere. So that's pretty great. Another option that you could do that Isaac mentioned earlier is cover crops, which are things like barley, crimson clover, legumes like beans and other broadleaf species. They help to sequester carbon in their roots because they're plants. They photosynthesize. They keep it in their roots and then disperse it among the soil. And that also helps to revitalize fields. So that's why oftentimes you'll hear farmers talking about rotating their crops.
Right.
So they might plant potatoes and then beans and then corn, because each of those leaches different nutrients into the soil, which decreases your fertilizer cost and helps to sequester longer terms of carbon.
Now, if you harvest these crops, does that release the CO2 again? Because my understanding was that, like, without those, like, ancient prairie grass root systems, the ability of soil to absorb carbon dioxide is basically none.
You establish the system with the roots of these different types of crops, and then the soil is able to, it's like a bank. You can always invest more. You might release a little bit of carbon dioxide when you harvest the plants and you burn them, or when you take it out of the soil, but the soil will already have maintained and you're not taking from the soil then. What we'll take from the soil is when you plant a crop that is highly carbon dependent, and then it will pull the carbon out of the soil as a way of giving fertilizer to the plant. And then when you harvest that plant, then that's when your carbon dioxide would be more emitted. But if you had 20 million acres and you planted if you planted cover crops across 20 million acres, it would sequester about 60 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is the equivalent of 1.2 million passenger vehicles.
Wow.
Sorry, 12.8. I misread that. 12.8 million passenger vehicles.
Gee.
So cover crops are a very important thing. One thing that you could do if you were interested in this kind of work, your front lawn is not very good at sequestering carbon. It's not really good for anything.
Right.
So what you could do is you could essentially rip up your lawn and plant it with species of clover instead. It still looks very nice. You don't have to mow it. It's better for pollinators and other species, and you would have better carbon sequestering that way.
Well, that's that is interesting. I know that clover grows tends to grow in ground that's more acidic. So is that, that's all tied in with that?
It is.
Okay. Well,
we have, I just stopped mowing half of our yard. Now we have a big yard.
Okay.
But we basically just went to prairie grass.
Oh. In
half of our yard. And you wouldn't believe the amount of pollinators we get in the summer.
Really?
I mean, it's like you go out there and you'd be like, oh yeah, that's a nice prairie. And then the longer you look at it, the whole thing starts to move. It's quite bizarre, actually. It's like one of those magic eye pictures where you're like, wait a second.
Well, so they're still working on things to try to reduce the amount of carbon we have. So
they are. There are some scientific new technology that they are testing, some of which are more successful or pose less risks than others. That would be called geoengineering. A lot of those are not. They can't test on a large scale because they have a great risk factor. But those are options that people are trying or looking into, rather, researching.
Well, this has all been great stuff. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. This is very informative. You should teach this.
That is what I'm working on. I'm trying really hard to get from, teaching kindergartners is vastly different than teaching adults, though sometimes they act the same.
Yeah.
I would love to have you back just to talk about plastics in consumer goods.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be a good episode. Because I've read a lot of stuff about the microplastics and where all the places that are showing up now.
Well, and you mentioned earlier mixed textiles, polyester and carbon, and stuff like that.
Right,
that would be really interesting to talk about.
Anytime, you know where to find me. I live with you.
That's true.
Emma, thank you so much for being here with us. Me. Oh, this was so awesome. I really enjoyed this, and it's so informative. And you're such a great speaker.
Thank you.
This has been a treat for me. And are there any loose ends that we need to tie up? I know you
Any last things you want to get in?
Yeah. Was there anything that we didn't get to that you were just itching to talk about?
I mean, you get on the subject of trash and landfills and plastics and recycling and things like that, and I could talk your ear off. So I won't subject you to that.
Well, that could tie in with our discussion on plastics and things too, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
She's really into trash.
Oh,
that's why she married me.
Oh
no. Oh well.
I mean, I think I if I could leave anyone with something is that even if you feel like you can't do much as an individual, it's better to try than to give up hope. Because if you give up, then you know we're already dead.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I would say continue to try, and
we can't throw in the towel. So there again's the happy medium. Let's not throw in the towel. Let's also not just stand by and do nothing. We have to keep putting pressure on businesses, on politicians, whatever we can do. At least, hey, let's get down fighting anyway.
Absolutely.
I hope we don't have to get to some cataclysmic event before people really get serious about. I mean, I was thinking about police brutality and things like that. See, so sometimes it takes. I mean, I'm not. It's sad. I hope we don't have to learn our lessons the hard way, for my grandson's sake, and for all the other generations coming up behind us. But yeah, I couldn't help but think about the old joke when you were talking about the farming, about the guy who married the farmer's daughter because he liked the way she rotated her crops. Anyway.
Oh my goodness.
You never heard that one. So anyway. Oh, well, it's been great. We've really enjoyed this. So thank you, Emma. And Isaac, is there any last thing you want to add here?
Just that if you have questions for us, reach out to us at thehappycynics@gmail.com. We are happy to field any questions or take any comments.
If there's some topic you want us to tackle, we'd be glad to do it. And we want to be here for you, for your sake. We're doing this for ourselves, but we want to reach the audience and give you something that's helpful. Anyway, Emma, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I just was going to say, if anyone had any environmental questions or wants to challenge me on anything, you're more than welcome to email them at the aforegiven email, and I will do my best to help with whatever I can.
Very good. And that's thehappycynics@gmail.com. Again, thanks for listening. Let's be responsible and be happy and make things better for the next generation. We hope you all have a great day. We'll be back with you again very soon.